In the property cycle just beginning, 35,000 Australians are set to become property investors for the first time. The reality is, though, many of them will go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a property without any professional advice and no investment plan on which they make their decision. And it leaves accountant, financial planner and mortgage broker Stuart Wemyss scratching his head. I spoke with Wemyss about his new book, which seeks to address the financial planning issues that he believes other property books and courses too often leave out. Stuart, you quote a figure in the book that only 5% of investors ever manage to buy more than one property. What does that figure say to you?
Brooke, I think it demonstrates the lack of planning, because I think if you sat down and worked out people's retirement goals and worked out how much they need to invest and so forth to meet those goals, they'd work out that they'd need generally more than one property to fund retirement. So it says to me that people haven't sat down and done those calculations. And look, they might be investing in shares as well and so forth, but generally, if you get property investors, they're generally pretty single-minded and have a lot of their assets tied up in property. So that's what that says to me. I would expect if people sat down and did some planning, a lot more investors would buy more than one property.
When you speak to people and you find that there's really no strategy and maybe that's why they've just kind of bought one property and stopped there, what do you think is the biggest hurdle, the biggest barrier? Why aren't we doing that?
I think it's the lack of knowledge of where they're heading. I think a lot of people don't actually realise that whether they're going to be able to fund retirement or not. I think it actually comes back a step further. People haven't set any goals. They don't really know when they want the flexibility to stop working and how much money they need in retirement, what sort of lifestyle do they want to live in retirement, and therefore working it back, then income and how much assets do I need. I think if people start doing those numbers and realise and think, someone might think, hang on, I really need to get back into the property market or share market or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I was interested in your book that you said really people should have a non-financial goal in mind. It's an interesting concept when you talk about investing and buying properties.
I think most of us relate better to non-financial goals. If we can sort of picture a lifestyle that allows us to sort of work when we want, maybe a couple of days a week, spend a bit of time with the grandchildren and those sorts of things. If we can picture those sorts of things, that's really going to generally drive us harder and faster to meet those goals rather than just some sort of ballpark income figure or net asset figure.
Tell us how you incorporated the interviews that you did with 4 property experts, also authors themselves, into your book.
What I wanted to do, I found that speaking to property investors, a lot of investors, particularly first-time investors, were getting a little bit confused about which property strategy is going to work for them, and there wasn't really any numbers behind it. So a lot of these sort of property authors or promoters come from very much a property background, not necessarily a financial background. So what I wanted to do is sort of sit down independently and work out, well, okay, let's look at a couple of different case studies and when or what strategy would suit which person, and to sort of help people through that sort of decision process to work out what's going to work for them and build a plan around it. So then what I wanted to do is do that financial analysis and then go back and ask the hard questions on the experts to say, well, you say your strategy works because of this, but my numbers have been telling me this. What do you think about that? And it was really interesting to see the different responses that I got from seemingly two people that are in the same property camp, if you like.
Yeah, I know that in the past you haven't been much of an advocate of positive cash flow as a strategy for property investing, but this is one of the things that you really discovered in your research and with your interviews, that you've changed your mind a bit on that one.
I think what I appreciate more now after writing the book and doing the analysis is that it's very much a personal thing. So a positive cash flow property might actually suit someone in a particular situation, even if it's just to get a start into the property market. So whereas I was a bit black and white before I wrote the book and had my own personal views, but what I wanted to do is be quite agnostic. When I wrote the book, I just wanted to start with a clean sheet of paper without my personal views and just do the numbers based on the case studies.
And you found that really it was quite a good strategy for someone, maybe a low to middle income earner, and maybe if they're trying to get into the market. Does that mean you don't think it's, in terms of a complete strategy, something that you wouldn't use over a lifetime?
Yeah, look, I think property is always going to be a growth asset. I mean, theoretically, there's 2 main growth assets within financial planning, shares and property. And a growth asset is something that's driven by capital growth. So at the end of the day, I think most property portfolios or strategies need to be driven by capital growth. Now, whether that's generated by buying high quality property or whether it's through development and so forth, that's up to the individual. So a positive cash flow property, if it also then provides a bit of capital growth, a little bit like the Margaret Lomas style of thinking, I think, then you get almost the best of both worlds.
Getting the money off the lenders at the moment, I suppose, is one of the issues post-GFC. How restrictive have you found lenders are right now in terms of valuations or the amounts they're willing to give or even the criteria?
I think that's probably, particularly in 2010, that's going to be probably the most difficult aspect for investors and particularly first-time investors to get their head around. I think over the last decade, lenders have been relatively predictable in terms of whether